During my mother's funeral, the day took an unexpected turn. It had already been an incredibly difficult day. My heart weighed down with sorrow, trying to find my way through the pain of losing her. But when my mother-in-law, Ava, showed up, things shifted in an uncomfortable direction. She entered with a smile, offering her condolences, which I politely acknowledged. However, there was something off about her overly cheerful attitude, especially given the somber occasion. Then, she said something that completely caught me off guard. With a casual tone, she mentioned that the house I had inherited from my parents would now belong to her son, my husband, Jack. She seemed utterly unaffected by the gravity of the situation, walking through the house almost as if she were considering which room she might claim for herself. At one point, she even asked out loud, "I wonder if this room would be good for me." The thought of her stepping into my parents' home, a place filled with memories of my family, felt like an invasion. It was a cruel reminder of my loss. I calmly told her that I was the one who inherited the house, but her response was dismissive. "Well, you're married to my son," she said. "Everything you have belongs to him, so in a way, this house really belongs to my son, doesn't it?" Her words cut deep, and my frustration began to build. How could she be so cold, so detached, especially when I was still reeling from my grief? She then suggested that we should get along better, as if she was planning to move in soon. The audacity of her words, the lack of consideration, it was all too much. Jack had always been a kind and respectful partner. I had been so grateful for his support. We had been married for a few years, and things had always been steady between us. But Ava's behavior at the funeral left me feeling completely unsettled. This house, my parents' legacy, was not something I was willing to just give up. My mind raced with the need to protect it, to ensure that no one, especially Ava, could lay claim to it. As I tried to process everything, I found myself reflecting on my past. At 44 years old, I had nearly given up on marriage. But then I met Jack. He was 5 years younger than me, and we hit it off instantly. Our relationship felt natural and effortless. He always respected my opinions, and when it came to planning our honeymoon, he was more than happy to go along with my choice of the Maldives, even though he had initially suggested Europe. It felt like the kind of partnership I had always hoped for. But even with all the joy Jack brought into my life, there was an undeniable sense of loss. My father had passed away long before I ever married. He never got to see the day I walked down the aisle or meet Jack. I never had the chance to reassure him that I was okay and that I had found someone I could trust. And now, with my mother gone, I was facing that same grief, compounded by the tension with my mother-in-law. Despite everything, Jack had been incredibly supportive during my mother's funeral. He was by my side, checking in on me, always offering comforting words. I felt lucky to have him with me, especially when things grew tense with Ava at the funeral. I had chosen to hold the ceremony at my family's home. It felt more personal, more intimate than having it at a funeral home. Jack respected my decision, even though it wasn't the easiest choice. But Ava's behavior in the house was completely incomprehensible. After the ceremony, she casually remarked about how lovely the house was, brushing aside any messes with a nonchalant, "Oh, it's no big deal." She wandered around as if she already had a claim on the place, even musing aloud, "Maybe I'll take this room." I was stunned, but it was clear her words were more than just idle chatter. She was claiming ownership. It felt like an intrusion. This wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, a place of refuge amid my grief. I reminded her again that the house belonged to me, but she simply smirked and said, "Your parents had no." Ava's words were clear and cutting. "As a wife, everything you have belongs to your husband, so really, this house belongs to my son, doesn't it?" The weight of her comment hit me like a slap, and her dismissive tone left me seething. I couldn't understand why she would bring this up at such a delicate time, during my mother's funeral of all moments. Then, as if things weren't already difficult enough, she went on to announce her intention to move in. This beautiful house would be a waste with all these empty rooms, she said. And I won't have to take care of my husband alone. I couldn't believe my ears. Her words, so insensitive and detached, made my mind spin. How could she be so out of touch with the gravity of the situation? Just then, Jack overheard and stepped in. "Mom, what are you doing? This isn't the time for this," he said, his voice firm. Ava, however, was undeterred. "Why make such a big deal out of it?" she replied. Jack, clearly frustrated, told her to leave. "Mom, go. This isn't the time." He turned to me, his face filled with regret. "I'm sorry. My mom can be unreasonable." In that moment, I appreciated Jack's support, but my frustration didn't just vanish. I was hurt and conflicted. Ava's casual disregard for my feelings left me unsettled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was overstepping in ways that were hard to ignore. In the following days, things began to shift between Jack and me. We had been talking about moving out of our cramped apartment. It was becoming too small. "This place is getting too small," Jack said one day. "Don't you think we should move back to my parents' house? It would give us more space, especially if we're thinking about having kids." I agreed that we needed more space, but I was taken aback by his suggestion. The idea of living with his parents had always made me uncomfortable, particularly after Ava's behavior at the funeral. I had hoped Jack understood my concerns, but as I looked at him, I began to question whether he was really on the same page. Was he just going along with my preferences, or was he letting his mother's wishes dictate his decisions? His willingness to accommodate Ava even after everything that had happened made me feel like my voice wasn't being heard. Then came the real shock. Jack suggested that his parents move in with us. I could hardly believe it. I had been clear that I didn't want to live with them, but Jack seemed to avoid taking a firm stance on the matter. Instead, he tried to remain neutral, thinking it would keep him out of trouble. But this wasn't something I could compromise on. I needed Jack to understand that the house wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of my family's legacy, something I wasn't willing to share without a fight. One day, after yet another tense conversation about living arrangements, I walked into our living room to find Jack rearranging the furniture. "What's going on?" I asked, concern rising in my chest. "Are we packing up to move?" He looked up and said, "No, I'm just making space for two." It felt like a subtle but powerful shift in the direction he was taking, a decision to prioritize his mother's wishes over mine, regardless of how I felt. My sense of the future with Jack started to feel uncertain, clouded by this tension. Would I be able to stand my ground and protect the home that meant so much to me? And could Jack truly support me, or was he being swayed more by his mother than by the life we were supposed to build together? The mention of 2 beds sent a chill through me. Hesitating, I asked, "Are your parents moving in?" Jack's response made my stomach drop. "No, they're moving in today." I was stunned. Despite all my objections, it seemed Jack and his mother had already made the decision for us, without even considering my feelings or input. My mind was racing, and I felt like the future I had envisioned was slipping away. "Why is this happening?" I asked, my frustration growing. "Their lease is up, so we decided they'd move in here instead of renewing it," Jack explained casually. "It'll be cramped, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it." He spoke as if this were just a minor inconvenience, something we simply had to ride out. I could feel my blood boiling. "That's not what I meant." I snapped. "Why is living together even an option?" I made it clear before that I didn't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house during their funeral and acted like she had every right to take over one of the rooms. Jack had promised to talk to his mother, but it was obvious that they had already made up their minds. "I don't get it," I said, feeling defeated. "Why do you prioritize everything she says?" Jack sighed, trying to explain. "It's not about prioritizing her. I listen to both of you." But it was clear he couldn't resist his mother's influence. When it came down to it, I wasn't sure he could even see how much control she had over him. Though I'd always seen Jack as kind and respectful, around his mother, he became someone else, weak and unable to stand up to her. My mother-in-law and father-in-law settled into our already cramped apartment, and it didn't take long for her to start complaining about the lack of space. This only fueled my frustrations further. I apologized, saying we'd manage until we found a bigger place, but it didn't ease her discontent. Her dissatisfaction was palpable. Peter, my father-in-law, was polite at first, but it soon became clear that he would simply follow his wife's lead, unable or unwilling to make decisions of his own. A few days later, my mother-in-law asked me to run an errand for her. She wanted me to buy a Medicaid patch, a small task, but another one to add to the growing pile of things I resented. What had started as an uncomfortable situation was now unbearable. The idea of living together felt like a nightmare. As time passed, I realized more and more that I had to protect my childhood home. It had always been a place of comfort and memories of my parents, and the thought of them possibly living there felt like a violation. After 12 days of silent tension, I made a drastic decision. I officially renounced my inheritance and sought court approval to give up my rights to the property. When I told my family, I explained calmly, "This house means everything to me. I can't bear the thought of you living there, so I've decided to let it go. I'll keep it in my heart as a beautiful memory." My mother-in-law was furious. "What madness possessed you? You could have sold it for a lot of money. Why just abandon it?" she demanded. I stayed calm, responding, "Selling it never felt like an option. It would only make you depend on that money." I thought to myself. I believed it would be clearer if I had no part in it. Her face twisted with fury. "We moved out for this? How are you going to make it up to us?" she yelled. I stood my ground, calm but resolute. "I've always been against living together. You forced the situation on us without properly discussing it, so I had to take a stand." The revelation left both Jack and my mother-in-law in shock. Their faces went pale, and neither of them knew how to respond. My father-in-law, Peter, simply stared, clearly confused by the unfolding drama. I turned to Jack, who looked visibly shaken by my actions. "I've been thinking about getting a divorce," I said quietly. "What do you think?" Jack stammered, clearly caught off guard. "A divorce?" Before he could say more, my mother-in-law's voice cut through, sharp and commanding. "Jack, you should divorce this ridiculous wife immediately." Her demand was harsh, but I knew it was a test to see if Jack could make a decision independent of her. Jack hesitated, his uncertainty written all over his face. It was clear he wasn't prepared for this. I couldn't wait any longer. "Fine," I said, resigned. "If that's what you want, then go ahead with the divorce." I turned and began packing a few things, knowing what had to be done. That night, I stayed in a budget hotel, my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The next day, I took a half-day off from work and went to the courthouse to file for divorce. A few days later, my mother-in-law called, her voice trembling with anger. "What's going on? Why is that house becoming yours? What's this sudden change?" I could feel the tension in her words. She had likely found out that I had withdrawn my renunciation through the estate division process. Her frustration only grew as she pressed me further. "The house is supposed to be yours, but you renounced it. Why is it coming back to you?" she demanded. I remained calm. I withdrew the renunciation. It's possible to retract an application before it's processed, and that's what I decided to do. I let you believe I had given it up to gauge reactions and decide what to do next, particularly regarding the divorce. Her face twisted with frustration as she tried to salvage whatever she could. "The property should be split in the divorce, right?" she asked, probing further. I shook my head. "It's an inherited asset, so it's exempt from property division." She kept pressing, asking how Jack might benefit from the property division. I responded firmly, "We've only been married a few years. If anything, the division of inherited assets would be minimal." Despite her attempts to twist the situation, I stood my ground. I'm protecting this house because it holds precious memories of my parents. I don't want people like you living there. If you have further complaints, take them to a lawyer. The divorce process moved quickly after that. My mother-in-law insisted on speeding it up, and despite her motivations, it was finalized. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had successfully safeguarded my father's home from any disruption. Once I moved out, I couldn't help but think about how my ex-in-laws were handling their new living arrangement. The cramped space must have been a challenge. My former mother-in-law began searching for a new place, but the realities of aging and difficulty with passing rental screenings made it harder for her. Eventually, Jack found a small single-family home for them. It was definitely a downgrade in size, but it gave them the privacy they craved. Of course, it came with its own set of challenges, more expensive and likely harder to maintain, but it offered them the space they wanted. As for me, I found peace in my parents' home, a sanctuary filled with memories. It almost felt like they were still with me, in spirit. I had fought for what was mine, and in the process, I had found a fresh start, free from the burdens and tensions that had weighed me down for so long.